what I want to do this morning is I want to kind of record your story so that we can have other people who may face issues like you faced understand that there's an opportunity for them. And I have asked you to come and be videotaped this morning, knowing that what some of the questions I may ask you or some of the things you may say may be somewhat intimidating for you or be out there in terms of culture or whatever. And but is it okay with you that I do this and I use this tape for public dissemination to help people?
Yes, absolutely.
And can you tell me, Jeff, what your situation was just at the time before coming to Brain State?
Well, the day I actually made the phone call, which was about a week and a half ago, I was in an extreme state of suicidal ideation. I was ready to end it. And I'm not saying this, in a dramatic fashion. It's a very alarming fact. As I look back, I was prepared to commit suicide. I didn't want to commit suicide. I don't think I've ever wanted to. However, I've considered it throughout my life. It has always been a means to an end for me. The end was actually escape, escapism from a lot of the pain of depression, anxiety, and the situations in life. It had come to a crescendo, I think, just prior to calling, and I think through a series of, call them synchronistic events or an unfolding that I should happen to just see your interview on Conscious Media Network. And I knew something was there, that there was hope, because I had tried everything else. In the last 6 months, I've been to acupuncturist, massage therapist for the craniosacral treatments. I even went to a shaman for soul retrieval. I've taken all kinds of medications over the years to no avail. I stopped taking medications for depression and anxiety about 2 years ago. Even, from my childhood, I was raised in a very dysfunctional home, as many people are. My father was an abusive alcoholic, and I think rather than just physical abuse, it was emotional abuse. And I've always been a very sensitive person. I would consider myself kind of an intuitive, sensitive type. So these things that occurred to me throughout my life just really took a toll, and I think there was an accumulation of these events in my life that just always kept me focused on the other world and relief and escape, to the point that, there were many times where I considered suicide, although it's not what I wanted, but it was the means to the end, and the end was relief from the pain, because I know those who experience anxiety and depression know it's debilitating, it's painful, and you find that you attempt to develop all sorts of coping skills and abilities to fool your employer or your friends that everything's okay, and calling in sick because you have the flu when really you just can't get out of bed because you're so depressed. So since a teenager I experienced all this, and especially for me it was very difficult because I am gay, and as a teenager I experienced tremendous rejection from family, friends, and I felt extremely isolated. And there were many times that I just wanted to kill myself because I just didn't feel like I belonged. And then, as happenstance would have it, I joined the Air Force, spent 20 years in the Air Force, retired as a major from the Pentagon, and moved here 5 years ago to Phoenix, Arizona. But during those 20 years, I'd experienced many times the witch hunts that would occur. In fact, I think Randy Schultz had mentioned it in his book, Conduct Unbecoming, that there was a military-wide witch hunt in the early 80s that went on that netted thousands of men and women, and I was caught up in that. And I was brought in and interrogated by OSI, Office of Special Investigation, and mind you, I was 21, 22, still a kid. Our brains don't develop, until we're about 25. We're still imprinted with these fears and anxieties. And I was all alone, stationed in the Middle East in Turkey, pulled in one day, treated like a criminal, interrogated, lied to, degraded, It was a horrible experience. But somehow I made it through that experience. But the rest of my career in the military, you know, it was almost a paranoia of looking over my shoulder and self-preservation. But when I wasn't at work, I threw myself into a lot of volunteer work at Whitman Walker Clinic, working, you know, in the gay community. I guess to some extent the fear and the trials and tribulations that we experience sometimes produce strengths and abilities within us that we can carry out into the community perhaps to help others. And this is an example of what I'd like to do, you know, by telling my story. And as a young man, I remember my first love, or my first boyfriend. His name was Jeff, and you know, I joined the military and I went overseas. And I remember coming back in July of that particular year, and I went looking for him. And I remember I stopped by one of our local haunts, and I asked, you know, the guys there if they'd seen him, and they just looked at me dumbfounded and said, "He died 3 months ago." And I was just, you know, in shock and denial. I couldn't believe it. I remember the next day I just scoured the cemetery where they said he was, and I finally found his grave. And I just sat there and wept for hours and hours because, of course, you know, back in the early 80s or 70s, you know, you just didn't share this information with people and family, particularly his parents, considering they were such fundamentalist Christians, and they'd actually sent him to a psychiatrist and tried to get him healed, you know, from his homosexuality. But, you know, that was traumatizing to me. And again, you know, I didn't really have anyone to share that with. I just bottled up the pain and went back overseas and, you know, continued my work.
So those seem to be all stories of suppressing
Absolutely.
who you are,
Generalizing.
holding back fears, because if you would let them go, release that information would get out, and then you would have hell to pay, basically.
Oh, absolutely. You know, I remember there was a particular guy at Scott Air Force Base who I was dating. He got caught up by OSI and gave them a list of names. They pressured him, threatened him with imprisonment. And this was in the early 80s. This is, you know, I think there was a height of these witch hunts going on. And he turned in all these names, and mine was one of them. And from that, I developed the instinct of don't share anything with anyone, because the more people know about you, the more they can use against you, the more they can use to hurt you. So not only was I internalizing a lot of the pain, because I certainly couldn't call my family and say, you know, I'm really heartbroken, my boyfriend, you know, died, and, you know, no one told me, I was never notified, and, you know, you just couldn't do that.
Right.
And in the military, who are you going to go back to? Your friends at work, and just, you know, when your buddies, and I flew medevac as a medic my first 8 years in the Air Force, and, you know, what I go to them and say, you know, I'm really bummed out today because my boyfriend died. You know, that's just not something you do.
Right.
So everything about my life was internalized. Everything was just packed down, you know, over the years. And I remember trying to alleviate that. I remember watching the comedy Airplane, where the comedian, you know, I remember him saying when things were really tense in the control tower, well, today was a bad day to stop taking drugs and whatnot. But you know what? My entire life, I've never done drugs. I've never smoked. I'm just not interested in alcohol. But all the vices that most people would turn to alleviate the pain, I just never found a need for it. Even though my father was an alcoholic, I just never had the desire for it. So all I could do was focus on exercise, and I became a long-distance runner. I remember many times getting off work and running 8 to 12 miles around the runway at the Air Force Base, diet, working out, and it helped. But, you know, as I gotten older, you know, into my 40s, the things that alleviated the pain as a young man aren't there for me anymore. And, you know, therefore, you know, I have to seek out new things and new ways. And one of the things that, you know, I began seeking many years ago was sort of a spiritual transformation. And I guess I would call myself a truth seeker. And I think also that when one sets out to seek the truth, whatever it might be, one opens themselves up for the same if you want the truth, you might not be able to handle the truth. Because I think to get to the truth, you have to go through the shadows of your life and all the things that you pack down, within inside yourself, the pain, the hurt, the suffering. I don't think you can find the truth without going through all of that. For most of my life, I wasn't prepared to look at that. I wasn't prepared to look at the pain, the hurt, the fear, the anxiety. I was ready to just throw myself into some other activity. And
so you found a way to get around it, to run from it, healthy way, that culture would call healthy, exercise, diet. But at some point, you turned to parenthood.
Right. Yeah. When I was a major at the Pentagon, being a gay man, I all my life, one of the things I wanted was a family, but I would have to approach it in an unconventional manner because obviously being gay, I wasn't going to get married, even though I did considered it years back, because a lot of men have gotten married to kind of hide and use as a ruse for their, to sort of the facade of a heterosexual. I wasn't prepared to do that because I don't think it would have been fair to me, the woman or the child. So a friend of mine had recently adopted a little boy from Vietnam, and when I saw him and his son together, something just clicked inside. It was just a mile marker in my life that said, this is it. But I really wasn't interested in babies and diapers and the crying and stuff. So I started researching more and more, and I found that there's tens, if not hundreds of thousands of children in foster care throughout the United States. So I contacted an adoption agency and just began the long journey of discovering what is it I had to do as a single gay male. However, at the time, I considered don't ask, don't tell to extend beyond my military career. I didn't offer to anybody within the adoption agency that I was gay, and they did not question me as to whether or not I was gay. It was simply a non-issue. They asked me why I wanted a child, and I said, well, for a very selfish reason, I want to be a dad. And I think that selfish reason is far better than attempting to be altruistic and wanting to adopt because you want to do good in the world. I think the best parents are the ones that are selfish and want to be a parent because they want to be a father or they want to be a mother. Well, as things would turn out, I found my first son when he was 12 in North Carolina. Actually, we found him on the internet, and I adopted him. He came to me, bipolar, post-traumatic stress syndrome, depression. This kid had been through a lot of abuse. But I related to that also. I related to his abuse and the abuse I had at the hands of my father and the abuse that my friends gave me, being gay. So I really empathized, and I found something inside myself that was very strong in terms of commitment to somebody that I could relate to. And with my son, I could certainly relate to him and what he went through. And it was a trying time. There were many hospitalizations in psychiatric hospitals in Virginia and Washington, D.C. I'd taken him to Walter Reed Army Medical Center. I'd taken him to Dominion Adolescent Psychiatric Hospital. I poured so much into this boy to help him to overcome his past. Well, as I was saying, 9/11 occurred, and I remember being out in front of my home and watching the smoke go up over the Pentagon, and I knew right at that moment that it was time to get me and my kid out of town. I'd been in Washington, D.C. for about 11 years. Worked for Congress for a year, Andrews Air Force Base for 5 years, Pentagon for 5 years, and it had taken its toll on me. It's a rat race there, and it's a tough lifestyle, and I didn't want my child to be exposed to that. So, we started looking at where could we go, and I considered many places, and Phoenix just happened to be one, and we might as well have thrown a dart at a map and said there we go, and off we went. No friends, no family, no support, no network. We just moved here, rented a house for a year. During that year, which was 5 years ago, as I look back, I call it was the beginning of my trail of tears, because it was by far the most difficult 5 years of my life. My son required so much intensive therapy. He was admitted to Devereaux Residential Treatment Facility. We tried everything to help this poor kid. He was just in a bad way, and it prevented me from working for a long time. And then all of a sudden we had financial hardships incur as a result of my inability to work, because he needed someone 24/7 with him so he wouldn't hurt himself or anyone else. So, it started out really rough here. I had no family, no friends to turn to. I was very isolated, and again, I began to internalize not only all the stuff that I'd packed down through all the years, but now I'm alone with my son, and he's having difficult times, and we're reaching out to every possible resource to assist him, and it's costly. And then at that point, while my son was at Devereaux, when I was visiting one evening, his roommate, a boy who was 2 years younger, came to me and says, "Hey, you're Joe's dad, aren't you?" I said, "Yeah." He says, "My name's David, and why don't you adopt me?" And I was kind of taken aback by it, and he was trying to sell himself, like, "Hey, I'd make a good son. Joe and I are really good friends." He says, "You might be looking for another son. Why not consider me?" And, and as fate would turn out, within a year, I adopted him, and that was 3-4 years ago. So my family suddenly grew from one son to two, and we were a family of three. But, at that point, I then was able to start working because Joe was doing much better, my first son, the oldest, and I started working juvenile probation in Maricopa County down at the Durango facility. And I was there for some time, and I was approached by someone from Arizona Children's Association, and they said, "Hey, you've got teenage boys, you seem to be working well with them. We really need some therapeutic foster parents." Now, these aren't foster parents, these are therapeutic. These are foster families that take kids who don't qualify for foster care because of their diagnoses, disabilities, developmental delays. These are the tough kids, the really tough kids. And we've got a lot of teenage boys who have no hope of ever being adopted, have no hope of ever leaving residential treatment facilities or detention. Would you consider taking in some kids? And I thought about it, and I thought, this might be a great opportunity, because now I could stay home and raise my two boys while taking care of, a couple other boys. So I said, sure, let's do it, but I didn't know what I was getting myself into at the time. To make a long story short, I ended up taking in two boys. We went through some traumatic times. These boys, on a couple occasions, tried to kill me with fireplace pokers, knives, choking me. It was just unbelievable. It was surreal how these boys didn't know how to be in a family. And here they turned to me to learn, how do I be a son in a family? How do I be a brother? They didn't know. And, this was very intensive, and it took a lot of energy out of me. And the depression just started coming on, because working with these kids is depleting, because their narcissism is always taking and sort of like draining you of your energy, and you become depleted, and without family and friends and a network to support you, there's nothing there to rejuvenate you, to refresh you, to give you hope. So my battery was draining quick, and as the years went by, I just hunkered down and did the best I could. And in fact, those of you who suffer from depression know that, oftentimes you simply lose any interest in doing anything you ever enjoyed before. You sort of hunker down in a defensive position. You stay home more. You stay in your bed as long as you could possibly stay in bed to stay away from the world. But I kind of used that as to parlay into an ability to stay home more with my kids. So my kids had me in the home constantly. I had no friends, no social life. I didn't go anywhere. So the upside of the down was that I was always home with my boys. And even though they didn't always want to talk to me, because, teenagers are sort of pushing their parents away at this point when I'm just getting them,
Right.
The fact that they know I'm just in the house gave them comfort. The fact that they know that there's somebody there who obviously cares for them and is providing them security and food, as long as they know you're there, they're fine with that. You don't need to interrupt them while they play video games and whatnot, but they're satisfied with that. I then took in a boy, he a 14-year-old boy, and I just fell in love with this kid. Just like we had tremendous rapport with one another. We got along really well. He was just a wonderful kid. And he had actually lived in the treatment facility with my other two sons who I'd adopted. And they were just ecstatic that he came to live with us. And they wanted, me to adopt him, and I wanted to adopt him. So we set out to begin the adoption process of my third son, Ryan. And so during the process, however, it was disrupted because it was last year. It was Easter Sunday of last year, March 27th, 2005. It was in the evening. I was sitting in the living room, and Ryan had gotten a goldfish bowl that day with a frog in it. And he was in the back room talking on the phone with a friend and cutting holes in a plastic container to make a lid for the goldfish bowl so the cats wouldn't get the frog. And unfortunately and carelessly, as he cut the container collapsed and the knife drove straight into his heart. He threw the phone down while his friend was on it. He told him, basically he said, "Oh shit, I just cut myself, I gotta go." And he pulled the knife out of his chest and I remember he put a dirty sock over it that he picked up off the floor. And he come running to me, he says, Dad, I cut myself. And, being a parent of teenage boys, first thing you think, okay, well, let me go get the first aid kit, we can take care of this. And then he showed me this cut, right near his sternum, kind of over his heart, with a little bit of blood trickling out. And I thought, well, let's get in the bathroom, put some pressure on this. So, mind you, I was a medic for 8 years in the Air Force, so I felt confident to handle this until we could get him at least to an urgent care for sutures. And as I was holding him in the bathroom, I had my arm around him and applying the compress. He just looked at me, he says, Dad, I'm really getting dizzy. I think I'm going to faint. And he just went down like a load of bricks. And I remember his glasses flew off into the tub and his head hit the side of the toilet. And he was just dead weight. And I was holding him. And I remember picking up a shaving cream can off the vanity, and I threw it across the hallway to my son Joe's bedroom door. And he came to the door, and he says, "What's going on?" I said, "Help me, Ryan's hurt." And he just passed out. And I thought perhaps he passed out as a result of, seeing blood or, the cut, which is not uncommon for people to just pass out. And as he laid on the floor, he began to come to, and he looked at me, and, the last thing he ever said to me was, "Dad, I'm okay." And his eyes rolled back, and he began to go into shock, and his arms turned outward, and he began seizing. And I was on the phone with 911 calling the paramedics, and his face began to turn reddish, purple. And so Joe and I picked him up and carried him out to the living room, and I was just in shock. It was just happening all too quick. And I remember grabbing a blanket, and I put it under his head, and I just held him. And he never came to again. I think that's when he left us, right at that point. And the paramedics arrived, and they began CPR, to no avail. I rode with Ryan in the ambulance to the trauma center. As soon as we got to the trauma center, they wheeled him into the trauma room, cracked open his chest, tried to massage his heart, but he was gone. And again, it was so surreal. It just happened too quickly for me to fathom and comprehend what happened in those 7 minutes. Where did my son go? And I remember thinking back, it's been over a year now, and I still have a lot of flashbacks and PTSD as a result of that. And I remember, even as a medic, in shock, I wasn't thinking like a medic, I was thinking like a father, because when I carried him to the living room, the father in me said, comfort him and put a blanket under his head and comfort him. When the medic would say, put the blanket under his feet and help him. And I wasn't thinking. And it's little things like that you relive over and over and thinking, could that have made a difference? Could anything I've done made a difference? And so from that day on, I was just very haunted about, is there anything I could have done to save my son? And it was such a traumatic event, losing a child. It was very, very difficult. I went to therapy, obviously, grief therapy, for the better part of the year. All my kids went into therapy, and I had four kids at the time, my 2 adopted and my 2 therapeutic foster children. And we were all grieving. It was just, it's undescribable unless, you've lost a child. It's just very hard. But one thing that came out of that was after he died, I became extremely interested in after-death communication, in near-death experiences, and I researched and I read and I know the work of Gary Schwartz, who's doing afterlife research. I read books by Moody, Atwater, just a number of authors, and read many near-death experiences on the internet. I just could not get enough of this information, and I studied very hard for the last year and a half, and it really helped me to understand that Ryan was in a better place. And I think bottom line, I discovered that we all survive our death, and I think if you think that when you die you're gone, that's probably going to be the big surprise of your life, is that you're not gone. And that was very comforting, but nonetheless, as a human being, I still suffered from the loss of my son and grieved for my son. And, my other children who were grieving, keeping them together, was a real challenge. But over the last year, there were many other instances in the home, working with kids who are delinquent, kids who have so many antisocial behaviors and characteristics and problems. We were having issues with the police, just right and left. And one of my kids did something, made a bad choice that cost me a civil lawsuit. There were instances where the kids were facing arrest. I've spent money on lawyers to protect them. It's everything you could think, and I don't want to go into too much detail about some of these things, because they're embarrassing and, things that kids do. And as a parent, you could sit back, as innocent as a dove, but, you're there. If you love your child, you've got to be there for them and, help them, protect them through the system. But all this became so too much for me. And in the past, I would say particularly in the past 3 months, I was just feeling so depleted that there was just no way out. And again, I didn't want to commit suicide. I wanted to escape. And as a young person with no kids, it was easy to escape. If you didn't like your job, you just quit and leave. If you didn't like the town you lived in, you just moved. But when you've got children depending on you, when you've got 3 cats, 3 dogs, goldfish, 5 children, there's nowhere to go. You can't just run away from it all. And I knew that I had to do something. I had tried acupuncture in the last 4 months, and I noticed there was benefits from it, but not enough to really help me. I went to a shaman and did soul retrieval because I read that during traumas throughout your life, you may lose bits or pieces of your soul which create problems in your life. And so I went to a shaman, and she conducted the ritual and of soul retrieval, and I found that helpful, if not just mentally, knowing that there was hope. I did craniosacral therapy, all kinds of supplements and dietary foods and just everything, but it just nothing seemed to quite help me. And I really thought about, the only thing left, and I thought about this as a child, one day, I may take my own life to try to escape. Sort of, it's my escape pod to exit this place that's so painful. And I was realizing that, all those thoughts are coming to this point now that I think it's time. So I began to prepare my affairs, and I did it obviously in secret. I wasn't about to tell anybody. I had a living trust drawn up for my boys. I made sure I read the insurance policy to make sure that suicide fell within their 2-year clause, so I was fine. I looked into various laws. I began putting together information packets, and I even told the boys, and I started to prepare them for my death without them knowing that I was going to leave. I just wanted them to know if anything ever happened to me, this envelope here, you need to open it and read it, and it'll tell you exactly what to do. I called my very best friend in Washington, D.C., and I had shared many of my traumas with him over the years, and he knew that it was, difficult for me. And I told him, I said, if something happens to me, I really need you to be there for my kids, as a guardian, as an executor of my estate, to help the boys. And he agreed that, he would always be there for them. if the time arose, you know, whether natural causes or some other event took place in my life. So I was putting everything together, and the biggest thing was, okay, well, how do I do it? And that was a real tough one. I started, you know, reading things on the internet, listening to news stories about possible, you know, could I overdose? Would I shoot myself? And, you know, I finally came to the conclusion that I would shoot myself. And the reason being is because my grandfather committed suicide, and he put a shotgun in his mouth and pulled the trigger with his toe in the front yard of their home. And I considered all the little details of, well, I wouldn't want to do it near my home. I don't want my kids to see me like that. And how would I do it to minimize the trauma to my kids? I even had a trial run one night. I put the barrel in my mouth just to sort of practice trial run. You know, not that I was going to do it that night because it was in my home. But I needed to know that I could handle everything that needed to be done. Everything was laid out just as it had to be. The fact that I had studied so much about near-death experiences and the hereafter, the other world, after Ryan died, actually was very comforting to me. And I knew that I wasn't just trying to leave this place and escape, but I was actually going somewhere better. So it was sort of a magnet, something that was attracting me to go to the other side because of the stories of such peace and tranquility and no suffering, no pain, no anxiety, no fear. You know, it's something that was just, you know, beckoning me and calling me. And I knew that this helped me to get over the fear of death, because I think that in spite of the fact of wanting to commit suicide, people still fear the actual act of the committing of suicide. But I was going to prepare everything. I had everything ready to go, and I was just waiting for the right time. And I remember crying so many times at night, and I would just be walking around the house, and my son would see I would just break out in tears crying because I knew that I would miss my kids. I was afraid what would happen to my kids, you know, with me gone, but I knew that I had my friend there. They would have ample insurance money to help them. They'd have the house. And I know some people say suicide is very selfish, but those who are intent on committing suicide, like I said, don't want to commit suicide. They simply want to escape, and they're not going to advertise it to friends because they don't want anything to happen to thwart their efforts. And this is where I was. And I remember sitting in my room one evening, planning on where would I go, and would I drive out to the desert and do it. And that was my solution, is go as far away as possible out in the desert, do it, and let them find me, you know, with a note. And I remember I just got on the internet, and I had, during my research of after-death experiences and the hereafter, I went to Conscious Media Network, because that gave me a lot of comfort knowing that once I was gone, things would be okay. And I remember I saw a new interview that had come up. It was Lee's interview. And, you know, I thought, oh, what the hell, you know, I might as well watch it and see what this is about. And I watched the interview, and I just sat there like, wow, you know, this is something. I've tried everything. I've tried medications. I've tried, you know, holistic healing. I tried, you know, acupuncture. I've tried so many things. I thought, well, this is something different. Everything else I did worked from the outside in, and it seemed like this was sort of working from the inside out. And, you know, in a last effort of desperation, I thought, you know what, I'm going to do this. I got nothing to lose. And I remember the very next day, I called the office to say I'd like to schedule an appointment. They, you know, for an intake. I didn't know what it was. And the lady said, well, you know, we do a brain mapping, and then we set you up with training sessions, but we don't have any appointments available for another 2 weeks. And right there I thought, oh great, you know, this will not do. I won't be here in 2 weeks. And just surprisingly, they said, well, wait a minute, we have an opening on Friday. I think that was like 2 days later. And I thought, can I make it 2 days? I don't know. Let's schedule. If I don't make it, you know, it's another opening for someone else. So I scheduled it. And the next 2 days I kind of hung in there, because I was really waiting for another event to take me over the edge, and that's what would drive me to the desert. And I came in, and I was really hesitant to come in too because I was afraid, and this may sound weird, but I was afraid that it would work and take away my desire to commit suicide, and it upset me a little to think that they might rob me or take away my escape pod. And I thought, oh shit, what if I go in there and they're able to help me and I leave and I still have all the problems in my life and it's unbearable, but all of a sudden now they rob me of my courage or my ability to take my life and escape. Then I'd really be up a creek without a paddle, because that means I have no exit. And I was hesitant to do this because it didn't make the problems go away, but the only thing it might take away is my desire to end it, which was my only hope at that time.
Mm-hmm.
So I came in for the appointment, actually with hope that, something could happen, maybe something miraculous could happen. And I remember I sat in the chair and they did the brain mapping, and I thought, well, this is great, and they said, well, we've got the mapping done, but it's still going to be 2 weeks before we can do the training sessions. And I thought, well, okay, well, this was all for naught. What a waste of my time. And then I went to the front desk to schedule in 2 weeks, and lo and behold, they said, hey, we just had a cancellation today. Would you like to start today? And I thought, are you serious? What do you mean? Yeah, absolutely. Let's do it. Anything. So we came in, set me back in the chair, and they had, I guess, various protocol that they used, and afterwards, it wasn't like a grand revelation, where I suddenly saw, a light and life was different. But I remember driving home and feeling something's going on in my head, and I couldn't put my finger on it, but something's a little different, and I'm not sure what it is. Something was going on, and I didn't know what it was. I was scheduled to come back the next day because there was another cancellation. So I came back the next day for another training session. And after that training session, once I got home, the escapism, the desire to escape was abating, and it was sort of evaporating. But I wasn't upset like I thought I would be that it would be gone. I was comfortable with it. I wasn't angry because, oh, now I can't kill myself because I don't have the courage or the ability. I was more like, okay, we'll see where this takes me. Well, there were more cancellations, just so I went back like I think 4 times in a row, in the course of 2 days. I came back for training. And after the 4th training, I went home and things really started to feel different. Nothing around me changed, but I felt as though I was more capable of dealing with what was going on around me. And I would say that really I felt like I was becoming an observer of my life as opposed to a participant in the torrent, waters of emotion and drama.
Mm-hmm.
I would liken it to, before I came here, I was in the ring with 2 heavyweight boxers standing right between them. And now all of a sudden I found myself out of the ring in the audience observing. There was still emotion, but there wasn't the fear and anxiety of being punched and beat up. And it felt surreal in that I was just simply observing things. And I remember that night, my foster son, who's bipolar, and he can go in some tremendous manic swings, he wanted to spend the night at a friend's house, and I said, well, you couldn't because I don't know who the friend is, I don't know who the family is, you can't. He became enraged, and I remember he picked up a can of soda, opened it, and just threw it on the floor, with all his might, and soda went everywhere, and he cussed me out and ran out slamming the door. And in the past, I would have been very upset with that. The anxiety level would rise. I would become depressed because I just feel like I have no control. These kids are just, running rampant. But I just stood there really calm, like I was just watching a TV program, just observing it. I didn't get upset, I didn't get angry, and in fact 2 hours later he came back and wanted to talk and apologize. And I told him, I said, you know what, I'm not upset with you. I cleaned up your mess. There may be still mess for you to clean up tomorrow, but I'm not upset. Let's talk. And I felt all of a sudden, where is that emotion that used to just whip me around like I was, the end of a whip. It was not there. I felt a lot more calm. I felt a sense of control, not in that I could control other people, but I felt now I'm controlling how I respond to these people. And I had not felt that before, because it seemed like things would happen to me in life, and I was a victim of, happenstance, and I would respond with that anxiety and depression and stress. But all of a sudden, it's like, well, there's another option. And I don't have to do anything, though, to make it continue. And I remember driving home after one session thinking, God, this feels so good. I need to focus on and relive the training session so it doesn't go away. I need to try to hold it in my thought and keep it there. But I realized I didn't have to. I could just forget about it, but it was still there. It was still working. Almost, like someone pressed the reset button on my brain or rebooted it and eliminated a virus, and all of a sudden it was like, wow, it's calmer,
Yeah. Do you remember, Jeff, when you, when I came in to talk with you about your assessment, and you told me that you were depressed? You remember what I said?
Yeah. First thing you said is, "What are you afraid of?" I remember you saying that, and the anxiety that was there. I remember thinking, well, I have a lot of fear. When you said, "What are you afraid of?" and I started crying and said, "I'm afraid because I'm going to leave my kids, because I'm going to kill myself, and I'm afraid to leave them. I'm afraid what will happen to them when I'm gone."
So in your brain map, we've seen hundreds of people with depression, and it generally manifests in a map, one of half a dozen ways. But in your map, what was manifest was just a huge amount of fear. And fear is like a constriction above the subconscious, which doesn't allow energy to flow through your brain in a natural way. So it's more like a hose, nozzle on a hose, water hose. And when you turn it and tighten it up so much, it'll just spray everywhere, But when you open it all the way, then the water will flow out more naturally. Mm-hmm. And so what we did with you was help you train your own brain to have that energy flow through you naturally. And that's what caused, I believe, you to experience that kind of reward. In other words, you didn't react the same way. You now have energy with new neural nets to react in a different way. You have brain flexibility. If it's just spraying out all over, you have chaos. But, did you experience that?
I tell you one thing, I have more energy now than I've had in a long time.
Yep.
And that was something, I actually started taking supplements for chronic fatigue syndrome, high levels of vitamin B supplements to try to help me. But no matter what I took prior to the brain training, I was still exhausted. I'd be in the supermarket checking out with groceries, and such a fatigue would come over me that I had to sit down, I had to lay down. I was exhausted, just exhausted. And I thought it was just emotional, mental exhaustion. But I know after the training, I had a tremendous amount of energy, because I know I didn't take the multiple naps that I needed during the day to cope. I feel more optimistic.
And how many sessions have you had?
I think 5 sessions.
5
sessions. Well, I'll tell you one thing for sure. After the 4th session, I knew that I wasn't going to take my life. I knew it. In fact, as I began to reflect on my whole life's journey, one of the intentions I always held was that I need to know why I'm here, what my life is for, what am I doing, and where am I going? The questions that everyone is asking themselves. And I'm beginning to see more clearly pattern recognition, cycles, symbolism, interpretation over my life that sees that a lot of the pain and suffering took me into a place, and now I'm coming out of that place, though all the more wiser and understanding of perhaps why I was there. And that's what makes me think that at the 11th hour, more like at 11:59, why I found, brain state, and how it brought me back from the edge, because I know just a slight breeze would have taken me over.
Yeah.
And through the synchronicities and through the coincidences of,
what was really amazing to me was that we had probably 30 people on a waiting list, and then you just call in, and people started canceling, and you could fill them, and it just kind of naturally flowed. There seemed to be some order about that. As we finish here this morning, you have some more scheduled sessions, do you not?
Yeah.
Okay. And you know that generally what we try to do, it's like the 80-20 rule. You go 80% of the way in about 20% of the time, and then to go the last 20% of the way takes you 80% of the time. But we're awfully glad you found us, and you're here, and you're doing something important in the world, helping those kids. Jeff, what would you like to, anybody that's listening to this, what would you like to say about your experience, just in terms of, it couldn't have been easy to come into something like brain state conditioning when you had no history of it and you had no background. And yet, somehow you believed in conscious media network stuff enough, and what those people are doing, which is also a huge service in the world. But what would you like to say to someone who might be listening to this, to encourage them or to share that piece of the experience of how they take that step?
Well, for those who, are considering suicide, I wouldn't throw out platitudes and says don't do it, things will get better, because when you're really considering suicide, you don't want to hear that, and you're not prepared to hear that. But what I would say is consider why you're at a point in your life where you're actually considering suicide as a means to an end, to escape whatever it is that's been causing you suffering and pain in your life. Consider, as I did, this option as a possibility to hold out hope, because I think many of my troubles were the result of a collection of crises and traumas throughout my life that just built a layer of fear. And once that fear is dissipated, it's as though my brain is functioning or is becoming more optimal the way it was meant to be. And in that capacity, I can think more clearly, more focused. My emotions appear to be more neutral. I'm not, when I was depressed and sad or angry, I wasn't looking for just joy and bliss. I would take just neutrality just to be satisfied. That is, just being peaceful, and content. And with that mindset of being neutral in my emotions and content and more of the observer in my life, I realized that, I've got a purpose, I've got a mission, although I couldn't tell you directly what the rest of my life will entail. But I can tell you, that I'm indebted to you for being alive today, because I would not have lasted probably 5 days. I was prepared, to follow through with my plan. And this was a plan that had culminated for many years. It wasn't something that just, I was taking, at the spur of the moment. So I would say to those of you who are looking to end your life, reconsider brain state as a possibility to bide yourself more time to really work on the issues or the circumstances in your life that have brought about this state of mind of escaping, the pain and suffering. And that's what I'm looking forward to from this point forward, is now that I know that I'm not going to go anywhere, my kids have their dad, and I have my life, my next goal is to work on quality of life.
Okay. And Jeff, to be sure people that hear this understand and realize, we didn't work with you at all in terms of talk therapy or.
No, I was a stranger, came off the street after seeing, the.
And we hooked you up with electrodes, and we let you see your brain, and then we let the computer actually talk with you to optimize your own brain. And we sort of were just people that facilitated that whole operation.
That's right. And just, after 4 training sessions, suicide's behind me. And I know that I won't do it because I'm just not in that state of mind anymore. And I really believed in this so much so that after a couple sessions, I brought my eldest son in, who I adopted 9 years ago, who's bipolar. And he actually is beginning training sessions as well. And he just got a job, and he said, "Dad, my head's a lot more clearer now, and I can focus, and I learned to run the cash register, in 15 minutes." And he's got tremendous amount of confidence now, and this poor kid never had that. And if I can, I'd bring all my kids in here, because this is something, at least level the playing ground for yourself and those that you love, to allow them an opportunity to improve the quality of their life. Because without this, I would not be in the seat today.
Thanks, Jeff. It's really nice of you to come out with this, and took a lot of courage, man. Thanks a lot.
Thanks.